like, what are your thoughts on Israel right now in terms of its place as a unique society on the spectrum of lunacy, of just collective insanity, in the same way that Nazi Germany was an example of just outright collective insanity? Like, where do you situate Israel in that right now?
To be perfectly honest with you, as I should be, I do meditate on that question a lot. And I'm not really sure if my historical scope is sufficient to make a balanced judgment. What I would say is the following things, nothing in extenuation, just putting it in the right historical context. There was a very good book written probably about 30 years ago now by a fellow named John Dowers, Dowers. It was called War Without Mercy. And it was a description of the kinds of language, public presentation during the U.S. war with Japan. And it was on both sides. The Japanese demonizing to the point of satanic description of the U.S., meaning everyone in the U.S., and the U.S. doing the same thing with the Japanese. If you read the book, it's very, very ugly. How the U.S. depicted the Japanese, the attitudes towards the tortures of Japanese, the glee at, for example, the incineration of Tokyo during World War II. I mean, glee. Then if you read about our own Indian wars, as they were called, the kinds of insanity that came out of very respected figures, even in retrospect, if you read Theodore Roosevelt's The Winning of the West, it's a 5-volume work he wrote, and his descriptions of Native Americans will make your skin crawl, I believe. So in that respect, you can't say Israel is completely aberrant in the broad history. These kinds of psychopathic outbursts are not unusual, especially after October 7th, where kind of all the demons in Israeli society, which for one reason or another they had to repress or suppress, all the demons rose to the surface, and all of the ugliness of that society. They felt they now, after October 7th, they had license, they had moral license to publicly espouse. I think a lot of it was repressed. It was there. If you scratched the surface with any Israeli, their loathing and contempt for Arabs in general and Gazans in particular. It was there, but there was always, it's a Western country, so there was a veneer of being civilized, and what October 7th did was it enabled the Israelis to free themselves from that veneer and for all the demons to rise to the surface. I would say, on the other hand, I would say Israelis, unlike Nazi Germany, they don't have the pretense or the pretext that they didn't know what was happening. Now, I'm not saying Germans didn't know. Germans, even though it was a totalitarian state, even though they were being barraged with the propaganda of this being a Judeo-Bolshevik war that was being unleashed on Germany, that it was because of the Judeo-Bolsheviks that the German soldiers were freezing to death, literally, on the Eastern Front, and they're being barraged with this propaganda over and over and over again. incessantly, incessantly. The fact is, they knew they may not have known about the concentration camps or the death camps. They knew about the concentration camps. Did they know about the systematic extermination? There is debate about that, but they certainly knew enough to know something horrible was happening. Because you have to remember, 50% of the Jews who were killed were just lined up and shot down. They weren't in Auschwitz or in concentration camps. It was on the front. They're lined up, shot down, in some instances, like Babi Yar, in the tens of thousands. So somebody had to be doing the shooting. And there had to have been conversation about what was happening. So they knew. But they have a pretext or a pretense that they didn't know. The propaganda, the totalitarian state, and so forth. In Israel, everybody knows. You know, at the beginning, even people like Gideon Levy, who I respect for sure, even they were saying, well, the Israeli media is disguising what's happening, and the Israeli media is just an echo chamber of Netanyahu and his cohorts, and so the Israelis are poorly informed. That's, with all due respect to Gideon Levy, that's complete nonsense. Israel has the highest usage of the internet of any country on earth. The Israelis were posting on the social media what they were doing. So whatever Haaretz or Yediot Aharonot or the others were saying, the Israeli soldiers were posting and boasting of what they were doing. Every Israeli knew and knows exactly what's happening. What has happened since October 7th, it is incorrect to describe it as a state project. That's incorrect. It's a national project. Israel has a citizen army. It's representative of the cross-section of Israeli society. The people carrying on the genocide are representative of, anchored in Israeli society. If it's not the person, him or herself, it's an uncle, it's a father, it's a brother, it's a son. They all know.
Daughter.
A daughter. They all know. They all approve. Every poll taken since October 7th has shown that roughly 95% of Israelis believe, knowing full well what's going on, 95% believe that Israel is using enough or too little force in Gaza. That is, 40% think Jewish Israelis believe that Israel is not using enough force in Gaza. So, in answer to Aaron's question, I have to be sensitive to other historical examples I've seen. For example, the U.S. with Japan, the U.S. during the Indian Wars. On the other hand, I do think that at least in the current world, let's say since World War II, this is in a class all its own for many reasons. I mean, the sheer numbers, since the 21st century, the last 25 years, it's unique in every category. There's just nothing like it. If you use any metric whatsoever, this falls into a totally different category, what Israel is doing in Gaza. Then the implicit question in what Aaron asked is, what degree of legitimacy does Israel lose as a consequence of the last 19 months? Does it lose its right to exist as a state? Does it lose any moral legitimacy any longer as a state. I'm sure people wake up thinking that place needs to be wiped out. And I try very hard to reason it through. What does the past 19 months mean? But you can ask yourself, Aaron, the Japanese committed horrific atrocities during World War II. I mean, they killed 25 million Chinese. That very little place called Japan, 25 million Chinese they wiped out. And we don't have to talk about the atrocities committed by the Germans. But very soon after World War II, for better or for worse, they rejoined humankind. So I don't have an answer. I suppose it's the job of a historian to ponder it, but right now, I guess now is not the time to ponder it. Right now, I think the job is to chronicle it accurately and do what one can do in the current circumstances, which seems rather limited, and to bear in mind who are the culpable characters here. Who are the culpable characters here? And to be accurate about that. Is it Trump? Right now, Trump is the head of state. But did he begin it? Did he open the door? Did the horrors begin with his inauguration? That's just not true. I get many emails every day from people who are feeling hopeless, hoping that I can show some light at the end of the tunnel, and I can. There's just something so morally abominable, and this is already a cliche, and I try not to lapse into cliches, that the Times has 3 articles on this couple.
The couple in D.C. who were killed. Yeah.
And 3 days ago, it was reported that 14,000 Gazan babies would die in 48 hours if food doesn't get to them.